If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address. W.E.B. DuBois famously put forward the idea of a so-called talented 10th. He felt that Black America needed to cultivate and promote a leadership class. And on the surface, that seems like a good idea, and it probably is, but it needs to be remembered that things like leadership come out of institutions. I've already told you what an institution is. It's a group of people who come together to promote an idea or an ideal, but you need resources for that. You need an economic base if you're going to have a leadership class, because a group is sustained by its resources. And if you control no resources, then you won't have a leadership class. You'll just have a group of pompous, self-important bootlicks who follow whoever does have the resources. And under white supremacy, that ain't us. Also, you have to be on the lookout for Negroes who think that they're going to replace the corrupt white power that has oppressed us. Let's be honest here. In the minds of a lot of these black folks you see strutting around, leadership class really means ruling elite. And as we've seen from so many Negroes who think that they've made it, they spend their time trying to make sure that no one else in the community has anything. We see these dirtbag moves all the time. This is not to say that we should not or don't need a leadership class, but it is to say that there's a good reason why we haven't been able to see one emerge from our group. And then there's the question of who is the talented 10th? The Negroes who the white media and these black misleaders try to convince us are our best and brightest? Well, they're anything but. We don't have a talented 10th. We have an untalented 10th. And why is that? Why are they such failures? The black leadership class is trying to get away from being black. They hate black. They hate the black grassroots. And they absolutely despise B1. You see someone attacking that, whether they try to palm themselves off as talented 10th or just a real black man, if they attack or cast aspersions on black first, they are agents. Full stop. Negroes who you don't know, never heard of, and seem to have dropped down out of the sky, they're suspect. I and others have been out here advocating for our people since the early 90s, and I've been online with it for at least 15 years. A number of us have. The reason that I and a number of the other new voices of black media sound so polished and tight is because we've been out here in the trenches for the longest. While other people were trying to hustle a come up for themselves alone, the same way we had those Kundalini energy clowns running around trying and failing to take us on, well, these days we got some other bootlicking clowns trying to reinvent themselves, and they're also going to fail. There's a lot of black people who have a dysfunctional relationship with their own blackness, and others who have an outright hostile relationship with their own blackness. We have to recognize self-hating behavior when we see it. When someone is actually ashamed of being black, wishes they weren't black so that they could be something else, then they will hate and resent those of us who are not ashamed of being black and who fly the flag loud and proud. B1 is a rallying cry to the honest and the courageous, but it is a threat to the cowardly, corrupt, and dishonest. We don't want people like that around us, so we need to double down on rooting them out. People who hate being black and want the rest of us to hate it too. First thing to remember, self-hating people will never admit they hate themselves. In fact, they will sound like a white supremacist and then give some version of, I have a black friend, or in the self-hating Negro's case, I love being black because I went to a cookout, or I'm in some black frat or whatever. So it's time for us to put pressure on them. We're going to make denouncing white supremacy and the black misleadership class the litmus test. Now, you don't have to worry about applying the litmus test to these black politicians. They've invalidated themselves so long ago it's not even funny. What I'm talking about is this recurring problem of these Negroes who pop up out of nowhere and want to call themselves speaking on black issues, but when you listen to them, you realize very quickly they don't have anything black to say. Make them call out white supremacy and the black bootlick misleaders, full stop. No ifs, ands, or buts. And absolutely no trying to point the finger at the black community. See if they'll do it. You'll find real quick that they start dissembling and whataboutism. Understand something. Anyone who has a problem with B1 has a problem with being black. Full stop. When you hear some Negro giving you any variation on the rugged individualist garbage, that's an agent. Racism is a group sport. So is black empowerment. But they got a lot of Negroes out here trying to undermine what we do. And the biggest red flag of all, whenever you have some fool trashing the black grassroots, ask that idiot if white supremacy is the biggest problem we face. And tell them you want a flat-out yes or no. Either it is or it's not. They won't say yes. They can't afford to. They want a pat on the head from white power. That's what they're out here for. So they don't want to offend or otherwise alienate their would-be paymasters. And you got a lot of Negroes out here thinking that they're going to do a pivot, trying to position themselves. A lot of them want interracial sexual access, so they don't want to mess up their chance to get some non-black drawers. That's a huge factor, too. There's other reasons to be sure, but white money, white acceptance, and sexual access are the main drivers. Anyone who tries to tell you that black people need to just ignore white supremacy, pretend like it isn't there, that's a traitor, peddling the old respectability politics line. You would never tell someone to pretend that cancer isn't there, or that the key to fixing a broken arm is to pretend it's not broke, or if someone keeps coming to your house setting fire to it, this other person tells you you need to stop complaining about this arsonist and maybe buy some better fire insurance or something, like that's a solution. Let me tell these lobotomized morons something. White power has not left us alone. The main reason we have so many bad actors in our community is because white power has spent the last 500 years, and the last 150 in specific, ruthlessly undermining our economics and tampering with our internal politics by sending in these agents, or just taking Negroes and turning them over to the pale side. And for you morons who say white supremacy isn't the problem, you're one of the parasites I'm talking about. What happened to those black townships that we built following Reconstruction? Did Pookie and Ray Ray destroy those? Did the neighborhood thugs cause redlining, deliberately undervalue black homes so as to deprive us of the equity and generational wealth of the real estate that we own? We have an epidemic of weak-minded Negroes among us, smart, dumb Negroes who only sound intelligent to other idiots. We have to call them out and run them out. They can't stay among us. You want to get in the good graces of the DNC so you can join Simone Sanders or beg for a White House job so you can become a lobbyist or some other form of influence peddler? Have at it. Nobody's stopping you, but nobody's going to help you either. Anyone who wants to swirl, divest, or otherwise separate themselves from the community, seek out interracial sexual access, nobody's stopping you. What are these people still hanging around for? You don't want anything to do with the black community, and yet I see you still hanging around in places like this, and we all know why. You're hypocrites and liars. You lied to yourselves. You know what the reality is, but you're too weak and too lacking in character to do the work that fighting and building demands. You try to make your cowardice and corruption sound like acts of valor when everyone recognizes you for the moral fraud you are. B1 isn't easy. It requires commitment. It requires character. Things these fools don't have. You want to know why the divestors didn't work? Why the so-called men's rights movement didn't work? Because the people talking that crap can only make it work if they establish a community. They don't have the intelligence, the maturity, or the character to do that. Please show me the community of swirlers and divestors. Where have they built a community? The swirlers were the last gasp of the black feminist bowel movement. The two gutter queens of that sewer, Crystal Cries a Lot and Synthetic G, have both flamed out, and in both their cases it wasn't black men who did it to them. It was the very white powers they idolized so much. For black women to be united in hating black men and ignore white supremacy is to enter into a suicide pact. And the same also goes for the so-called men's rights movement. Whenever black men like Philandro Castile get killed by the police, you didn't see any of those white MRAs out there. You only had the black ones talking. But here's my question. Where have they built a community? You know, Jack Johnson, when he was being persecuted for running around and sleeping with white women, he ran off to Mexico. And then he asked for other black people to join him there, saying that Mexico was a place where black people could be treated fairly. Well, apparently nobody ever told him there are Afro-Mexicans down there, and they're not treated anything near fairly. I guess that's why Jack Johnson ultimately came back to the U.S. and even went to prison and never went back to Mexico. By the way, there are folks who still haven't figured out that the white men who they're imitating trash black people. They celebrate anything that's seen as undercutting us, and they trade in all kinds of anti-black rhetoric. If you're merely united in disliking black men or disliking black women, then you're united in stupidity. You'll get a few atta bros or you go girls, but you won't get respect because your behavior is not respect worthy. There are fringe movements by people who, if they actually meant their words, would just move along, wash their hands of the situation and be gone, but they haven't and they won't. They claim to not want any part of the black community, and yet they also demand to be able to speak on it, give their asinine, uninformed opinions, and to be able to have a say over what happens with us. Family, there's a word for people like that. Traitors. You go look at any act of treason in all of history, and who were the traitors? Individuals who were mad that the group didn't bow down to them, people who didn't want to necessarily destroy those who they disliked, but they wanted to be able to exercise control over what they did. So they intentionally worked with those who fought against their people in order to try to control their people. That's what the traitor has always done. Attacking black people is easy. That's why cowards and liars do it. It's a sanctioned act. But going against white power, that's hard, because white power has the ability to inflict consequences for attacking it, but it also has the ability to give quick and easy rewards for those who suck up to it. The black community is in bad shape, and it has been for a long time. So, why hasn't the B1 abandoned it? Because we still recognize and appreciate the value that it has, even in its condition. And there are a lot of other people who recognize it too, which is why they refuse to leave. Now, for those of you who don't feel that way, you can get lost. Nobody will miss you. We've washed our hands of you. So why aren't you gone? Family, when we walked off the plantations, we made a fatal mistake. We allowed the bedwenches, bedbucks, bootlicks, butter biscuit bandits, and the turncoats to leave with us. We allowed every coward and corrupt shill to leave the plantations right along with us, and we have done nothing to separate them from us. We have to change that. Again, the litmus test is whether they call out white supremacy, and if they can't call out white supremacy without taking shots at the black community, then you've just identified an agent. We've seen this song and dance far too many times for us not to recognize it by now. These agents always use the exact same MO. They start off by calling out racism or external threats, pretending to a little bit of lip service. This is done in order to get you to agree with them, at least on one or two minor points. And then they start to sprinkle in the bull crap. Respectability politics, well, if we would just stop killing each other, etc. And then right behind that, white supremacy isn't our biggest problem. Why, it's us. Why, if we would just get it together. That's the pattern each and every time. They tiptoe their way to that talking point, and then when you listen to these clowns, you see that in truth, they never really criticize white supremacy at all. And yet they're the ones who want to be involved whenever we talk about policy. Everyone else talks about generational power, revering their ancestors and drawing strength from them. These bootlicking cowards talk about the here and now and revering no one but themselves. They're like demented children. You can see it by how they behave. Our economic deprivation didn't drop out of the sky. It was artificially engineered and continues to be inflicted upon us. The same practices of redlining and targeted economic destruction are still going on. Do we have bad actors in the community internally? Of course we do. But here's my question. Where's the talented 10th been at for the last 150 years to even address this? You know who I'm talking about. The proverbial talented 10th. We have plenty of black Greeks and fraternities and sororities. These are the main do-nothing Negroes I'm talking about. They strut like peacocks and talk about how well they're allegedly doing, but they're just as worthless. These alphabet soup societies are proud of how they've done nothing for the black community, but they have the nerve to talk about the condition of the community that they are, to hear them tell it, in the best position to improve but have done nothing for. Instead, they whine about how they want to move out to the suburbs and how somebody else needs to do something. Find me a Negro saying white supremacy isn't our main problem, and there's a big chance they're part of some black Greek organization or some other black bootlick society like Jack and Jill, etc. And these people actually hate the black community. That's why they hate B1. That's why they resent what we do, because they're auxiliaries of white power. Many of them have already found what they think is a comfortable place under white supremacy, or they're desperately trying to find some behinds to kiss so they can get a comfortable place under it. And what we're doing is threatening their gravy train. The Congressional Black Caucus is another group of do-nothing, untalented tenthers who come to mind. See, when you tell the story of the Pookies and Ray Rays, we also have to tell the story of the do-nothing black politicians, clergy, lawyers, corporate figures, would-be economists, and media entertainment suck-ups. Why is it that the so-called talented 10th, never in 150 years, those worthless good-for-nothings have never put their empty heads together to get anything popping off? Why is that? Does anyone seriously believe that if one of these would-be influence peddlers, one of these smart, dumb Negroes who attacks the black grassroots went to some beleaguered poor neighborhood and decided to buy land and begin to develop it, that it would change anything? It's very easy for the bootlick to call out Pookie and Ray Ray for killing black people physically, but the alleged talented 10th are the flip side of that coin because they willfully support and collaborate with the forces of white supremacy that kill us economically. And in many cases, when they kill black people physically, you got a lot of these would-be successful, respectable Negroes who make excuses for that too. I'm sick and tired of the cowards, liars, and traitors who sold us out for a sheepskin, a corporate job, or a non-black bed buddy calling themselves interfering with our program. We have an infestation of self-hating Negroes who make it a point to carry water for white power, but try to dress up their treason by claiming it's the best thing for black America. What do you think would happen if you let a parasite like that get into Congress, or into a police department, or get to be part of some reparations committee, or let them become vice president, or let them become part of the white media? You want to talk about internal threats to the black community? Let's deal with the internal bad actors. There is no more dangerous threat than the self-hating Negroes, many of whom are in the talented 10th. We have Pookie and Ray Ray doing nothing for black people at the bottom, and these treasonous 10%ers doing the same thing at the top. They hate when we point this out, because they're the ones who enforce white power's policies against us. Some of you may remember the fraud. He conned a lot of people into giving him their trust and their money. He monetized his duplicity. But time always tells, and eventually he revealed himself for the two-bit snake-in-the-grass grifter he'd always been. We have a new crop of morons following in his putrid footsteps, and they'll achieve the same results. Because a fool like that is auditioning for a job under white paymasters, or a position under someone in the bedroom. Anyone who tries to tell you the black community is not worth fighting for, you tell them then they shouldn't be talking about it either. Just hit the road, shut your mouth, and don't come back. We hear some variation on that every generation or two, and it always comes from bootlicks, swirlers, or intersectionalists. This has been a long-time problem that's been festering. And notice how a disproportionate number of these folks are not necessarily the Pookie and Ray Rays. They'll present themselves as some sort of educated or quote-unquote successful person. You see them on TV or otherwise beating their chest like Tarzan, telling everybody how great they are. A self-hating black person with a degree is nothing more than an educated fool. You memorized a lot of things, but you learned nothing. If you don't know white supremacy is the biggest and most important threat facing us, then you're too stupid to survive. And if you don't recognize B1 as the answer, then you're not worthy to be around us. Now, these clowns always come slithering back, usually when their white benefactors get tired of looking at them, or their non-black buddies get tired of pretending to like having them around. That's why I told you about Jack Johnson. And because they can't build a community, they will come back to us, because there's already one here, regardless of what they may try to call deplorable shape. And they'll still be talking the same garbage they were spouting before. We gotta start checking people's paperwork. We've always had Negroes coming amongst us saying they were so down with us and they're so black, etc. But when you make it where they have to denounce white supremacy, that's when they show their true colors. People have always been trying to use us as a power base in order to forward their own demands and their own interests. Often these turncoats won't reveal themselves right away, but eventually they do because they have to. They're ultra hypersensitive to white power's discontent, so they don't want to have a track record of calling out white supremacy too much. Once or twice, maybe, but they're dang sure not going to be doing it constantly. That's the reason why we pressure them into it, and if they don't, we dismiss them. The enemy has been trying to manufacture people to counter-program against our message for a long time, and their efforts have failed. They tried to pick bootlicks from universities and so-called social programs, Negroes who depend on white paymasters or politicians for their money. And we see the same efforts to manufacture Negroes online. It's been ongoing for years, but just because it's been going on a long time doesn't mean we don't have to put them in their place. To bestow instant legitimacy on a bootlick, that's what white power tries to do with television. You see some clown you don't know and never heard of, and the white media says they're a black leader, even though nobody follows them. Those efforts failed, so you have fools who are trying to talk like us, but only for a minute and only up to a point. And when they think they've got you on the hook, they pull out the white supremacy isn't the biggest problem facing us, racism isn't the biggest problem facing us. It never fails, and it never changes, because white supremacy has no new plays in the playbook, and neither do its cowardly minions. See, that's the entire problem with the so-called talented 10th. We were not forgotten by the misleadership class or merely abandoned. We were betrayed by them. And now the same good-for-nothings who have been spending all their time goofing off and being frat rats, sorority skanks, and ingratiating themselves with the white power structure are now slithering back to us and demanding that they be in charge of our fight for reparations when they don't even want to be here amongst us. Now, at what point do we decide we have zero tolerance for agents? If someone wants you to follow them, then the very first question you're supposed to ask is, why? And the second question should be, to where? So to take Negroes who think so highly of themselves but don't do anything for anyone but themselves, who have tons of great advice for the black collective but spend all their time trying to get crumbs from interested parties in white power, and in many, if not most cases, are inventions of white power, trying to hop in the bed with anything that isn't black and trying to stay away from anything that is black empowerment, if someone like that has the nerve to demand why we don't find it easy to get behind them, well, listen up, bootlick. Kissing white power's behind? That's a hard act for a real black person to follow. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Tyrone Jones, Miss Debbie, Wesley Monroe, Imani Metendaji, and one brother. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.